It was the kind of birthday party people post about online. A white tent stretched across the lawn, string lights twinkling in the middle of the day, servers in black vests balancing trays of lemonade that cost more than a tank of gas. Guests arrived in pastel dresses and linen suits, parking their shiny cars along the curved driveway like it was a red carpet. Everything was perfect, at least from a distance. But the birthday girl, she was sitting alone on the back steps clutching a doll that didn't match anything else at the party. Olivia had just turned 8. She wore a frilly pink dress with a satin sash and shoes that pinched her toes. Her stepmother picked it out, said it was on theme. Olivia didn't know what the theme was supposed to be, but it didn't feel like her birthday. She watched the other kids race around the garden, squealing with sugar highs and throwing confetti into the air. No one invited her to join. When she walked near the dessert table, one girl looked at her, then turned away, whispering something Olivia didn't catch. But she felt it all the same. That weird burn behind the eyes when you're trying not to cry in front of people. Her dad was busy talking to a group of men near the bar, real estate guys probably. Olivia heard them laugh about land prices in Texas. Her stepmother Candice stood in the centre of a circle of women with polished nails and frozen smiles, bragging about how she pulled the whole thing together without a planner. Nobody looked in Olivia's direction, not once, except for Ruth. She wasn't dressed like the guests. She wore a plain grey uniform and carried a tray of empty glasses with practiced ease. She didn't wear makeup or heels. Her shoes were soft-soled and scuffed. But her eyes were kind. Olivia noticed that, and Ruth noticed Olivia too. Instead of walking past like everyone else had, Ruth paused. Just for a second, long enough to see the girl's slumped shoulders and the way her thumb rubbed the fabric on that old doll's dress, like it was a comfort she couldn't find anywhere else. She didn't say anything yet, she just kept moving, but slower, watching, carrying more than glasses. Inside the party tent, someone raised a toast. Candice threw her head back laughing, as if everything was exactly how it should be. But Olivia sat on the stone steps behind the house, legs swinging just above the grass, heart heavier than any balloon that floated above her. And from across the garden, Ruth watched her, not like a maid, not like a stranger, but like someone who had once held that little girl close and never really stopped. She just hadn't been allowed to act like it, not in this house, not in front of Candice, not since everything changed. But today something was different, because today Olivia looked back. And that's how it started, not with music, not with cake, but with a glance between a child and the woman who never stopped loving her, even when no one else was looking. Ruth didn't go straight to Olivia, not yet. She knew better than to draw attention, especially in a place like this, where the forks were polished but the love wasn't. Instead, she set her tray down on the catering table behind the tent, wiped her hands on a towel, and walked around the edge of the garden like she was checking for trash. No one noticed. Not the guests, not the staff, not even Candice, who was too busy showing off the custom cake to a woman in pearls and forced laughter. But Ruth wasn't headed toward the garbage bin. She circled back, slow and quiet, until she reached the side of the house where Olivia sat. The girl didn't hear her at first. She was hunched forward, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on the cracks in the stone. That old doll lay in her lap, arms faded, one button eye slightly loose. Ruth crouched down a few feet away, resting her hands on her knees. "You all right, baby girl?" Olivia looked up. It took her a second. Recognition moved across her face like morning sunlight spilling through a window, soft, then bright. "Ruth?" Ruth smiled just a little. "Been a while, huh?" Olivia nodded slowly, then looked down again. She didn't say anything, didn't have to. Her silence said more than any complaint ever could. Ruth didn't ask permission, she didn't wait for approval. She just sat beside her on the step, knees creaking, skirt gathering dust. No cushion, no chair, just two people on a slab of warm stone. And for a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the party kept going, plates clinking, someone clapping, the low hum of a playlist meant to impress. But back here, behind the noise, was something else entirely. A kind of stillness you only find with someone who knows you, even after all the time and silence. Ruth reached into her pocket and pulled out a little drawstring pouch, the kind you might use for earrings or coins. Inside were a handful of plastic beads, different colours, shapes, some with little letters. "I used to bring these for you," she said gently. "Remember?" Olivia blinked. Her hand moved without thinking, reaching out to touch them. "You made me that bracelet, with stars on it." Ruth smiled again. "You still have it?" Olivia shook her head. "Candace threw it away." Of course she did. Ruth didn't react, not out loud. She just nodded slowly, as if that tiny loss was already something she expected. "Well," Ruth said softly, "I brought more." She poured the beads into her palm, let them catch the sunlight. "Want to make a new one?" Olivia hesitated, then nodded, just once, quiet but sure. And right there, while guests drank sparkling cider under paper lanterns and posed in front of rented flower walls, Ruth and Olivia picked out tiny plastic shapes and started stringing them onto elastic, bead by bead, colour by colour. They didn't need to say much, the act itself was loud enough. For the first time that day, Olivia smiled. Not the kind of smile you give for pictures, the real kind. The kind that rises slowly from someplace deep inside. Ruth didn't look around. She didn't check to see who was watching. She knew the risk, knew Candace would lose her mind if she saw, but she also knew something else. That bracelet, it wasn't just decoration, it was proof. Proof that someone still saw Olivia, still remembered what made her laugh, still cared. And Ruth wasn't about to pretend she didn't, even if it meant everything might change again. It didn't take long for someone to notice. Candace had just finished posing for a group photo in front of the dessert cart when she glanced across the garden. Her eyes landed on something that didn't fit the picture she'd spent weeks trying to perfect. There, near the edge of the lawn, was Olivia sitting on the ground. Not just that, she was with her, with Ruth. From that distance it looked harmless, maybe even sweet, to someone who didn't know better. But to Candace, it was an eyesore, an embarrassment, a moment that didn't match the curated aesthetic of the afternoon. She turned to one of the women beside her. "Is she really sitting on the ground with the help?" The woman didn't answer. She just took a sip from her glass and looked away, pretending not to see. Candace's jaw tightened. She didn't yell, that wasn't her style. But her silence had a sharp edge. She handed off her drink and started walking toward the catering tent, heels sinking slightly into the grass. Back by the steps, Ruth and Olivia were still threading beads, their heads close together like they were sharing a secret. Ruth had let Olivia pick every colour, every shape. A soft purple heart, a gold star, one tiny green bead with a little chip in it. Olivia said it reminded her of a jelly bean. Then carefully Ruth held up a letter. "Oh," she said, "that's for Olivia." The girl nodded, smiling. "Let's find the rest," Ruth whispered. They spelled it out slowly, one letter at a time, O-L-I. But before they could finish, a shadow fell across them. Candace. She didn't speak right away, just stood there, arms crossed, a tight smile stretched too wide across her face. "Well," she said lightly, "this looks cosy." Ruth didn't stand, she just looked up, calm. She wanted to make something. Candace's eyes dropped to the beads, then to the bracelet on Olivia's wrist. Her expression froze. "I think it's time to rejoin the party," Candace said, voice sugary but strained. Olivia looked up at her, then at Ruth. "I'm not done," she said. Candace's smile didn't waver, but her voice dropped slightly. "Sweetheart, this is your party. Everyone's waiting." "No, they're not," Olivia replied softly. The words hit harder than anyone expected. Candace glanced around, suddenly aware that a few nearby guests were pretending not to watch. She crouched slightly, lowering her voice. "Ruth, I'd appreciate it if you'd get back to work." Ruth didn't flinch, she didn't argue. But Olivia reached for her hand. "She's with me," the little girl said, holding on tight. For a split second, the air shifted. Candace's smile faded just enough to show the crack beneath it. She straightened up again. "We'll talk later," she muttered, then turned and walked away, her heels leaving tiny dents in the manicured grass. Ruth stayed still for a moment. Then she looked down at Olivia, whose eyes were suddenly wide and a little scared. "Did I get you in trouble?" Olivia whispered. Ruth shook her head. "No, baby, you just told the truth." They didn't finish the bracelet right away. Ruth tucked the rest of the beads into the little pouch and handed it to Olivia. "You keep it," she said. "We'll finish later." And as Ruth stood up to leave, Olivia reached for her again. Just for a second, just enough to say without words, "Don't go too far." Ruth nodded once and turned back toward the catering table, quiet and steady, like nothing had happened. But something had, and it wasn't going away. By the time Ruth returned to the catering tent, the whispers had already started. They weren't loud, Just little flickers of conversation passed between women in sunglasses and men adjusting their cuffs. A glance here, a tilted chin there, no one said anything outright. But everyone noticed. "She's still with the maid," someone murmured. "Is Candace okay with this?" another asked behind a sip of lemonade. Ruth heard it. She always did. Years in this world had trained her ears. You learn how to catch the tone under the words, the judgment that hides in politeness. She didn't react, just kept her hands moving, stacking plates, wiping down a table that didn't really need wiping. A few feet away, Olivia sat on a white folding chair near the drinks table, cradling the little pouch of beads like it was something fragile and precious. Her name wasn't finished yet, but it didn't matter. She knew what it would say, and somehow holding that unfinished bracelet made her feel less alone. Candace was doing damage control. She posed for more photos, laughed a little louder, praised the floral arrangements like she'd grown the roses herself. Every so often her eyes flicked back toward Olivia, then away, like she was trying to erase something with a glance. But Ruth, she kept working, quiet, present, unbothered. At least that's how she looked. Inside, her heart was heavy. She hadn't planned on sitting with Olivia, hadn't expected to make a bracelet or hold her hand or feel that old ache rise up again, the one that used to sit right beneath her ribs when she tucked the girl in at night. That ache never really went away. She had just learned how to carry it. Near the buffet line, a man with slicked back hair leaned toward Candace. "Is that the same woman who used to be the nanny?" Candace's lips tightened. "She's part of the cleaning staff now." "But the girl seems attached." Candace forced a smile. "Children cling to whoever gives them sugar. It doesn't mean anything." She laughed like it was all so silly, but her hand gripped her wine glass too tight. Back at the table, Olivia was threading one of the beads onto the elastic by herself. Her fingers were small but careful. She didn't rush. Each piece felt like a step back towards something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safe, seen, chosen. A girl her age walked by with 2 other kids, glanced at the beads in Olivia's hand, and wrinkled her nose. "What is that?" she asked. Olivia looked up, holding the bracelet just a little closer to her chest. "Did the cleaning lady give you that?" the girl said, half laughing. "She's not just..." Olivia started, but the words caught in her throat. One of the other girls giggled. "It looks like trash!" They walked off before she could say anything else, and just like that, the warmth in her chest faded a little. Olivia looked down at the bracelet. For a moment, she thought about putting it away, hiding it, pretending she didn't care, but she didn't. Instead, she slid it carefully onto her wrist, unfinished and all. Ruth saw the whole thing from across the garden. She didn't step in, not yet. Sometimes you have to let a moment breathe before you reach for it. But it broke her heart, watching Olivia shrink into herself again, right in the middle of a party thrown in her name. Because Ruth knew that kind of hurt, the kind you carry in quiet places, the kind that doesn't show up in pictures. Ruth stood behind the drink station, wiping the same countertop twice, pretending to be busy. But her eyes were locked on Olivia, still sitting alone, her little shoulders slouched forward like she was trying to disappear into the chair. The bracelet was on her wrist now, unfinished but there, like a whisper of something bigger. Something Ruth had once been allowed to give and then had to let go of. She looked over toward the crowd. Candace was laughing with 2 women by the photo wall again. Her voice had that bright, stretched quality, the kind people use when they're trying to sound like they belong. And Richard? Still talking numbers with a man in sunglasses, pointing toward the house like business was more important than birthdays. Nobody was looking at the girl, not really. So Ruth stopped wiping. She pulled off her gloves, folded them neatly, and tucked them into her apron pocket. Then, without asking anyone's permission, she stepped away from the table and walked across the lawn. Slow, quiet, like she wasn't even sure what she was about to do. But she knew she couldn't not do it. Olivia didn't see her at first. Her fingers were turning the bracelet around her wrist, gently, like she was trying to feel something through it. Ruth crouched down beside her. "Still missing a few letters," she said, her voice low. Olivia looked up. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry. She just nodded. Ruth opened her hand. Inside were more beads, tiny letters, smooth plastic in soft colours. "Want to finish it?" she asked. This time Olivia didn't hesitate. They sat on the grass right there, in the middle of a perfectly manicured lawn where no one was supposed to sit. Olivia poured the beads into her lap, searching for the ones she needed. I, V, I. When she found them all, she handed the string to Ruth, and Ruth tied the knot, pulling it gently to secure the bracelet. Then she slid it back onto Olivia's wrist next to the first one. The two sat together, quiet and still. On the other side of the garden, someone nudged a friend, pointing. "That's her again, the maid, making jewellery with the birthday girl." Another person laughed nervously. "Bold move." But Ruth didn't hear them this time. She was too focused on Olivia, who was now looking at both bracelets like they meant more than anything else in the world. And maybe they did. They weren't made of gold, but they carried something more valuable. Time, presence, a kind of love that didn't show up in invitations or thank you cards. "You okay?" Ruth asked softly. Olivia nodded. "I like when you're here." Ruth felt something stir in her chest, something old and deep and still alive. She looked out at the party, the tents, the decorations, the people clinking glasses and pretending everything was perfect. And then she looked back at the one thing that was real, the little girl beside her. "I like being here too," she said. Neither of them knew who was watching anymore, and honestly, neither of them cared. Because in that moment, it wasn't about parties or parents or judgment. It was just about choosing each other. It wasn't the bracelets that pushed Candace over the edge. It was the laugh. From across the lawn, she heard it, clear and bright. Olivia's laugh, not the polite giggle Candace coached her into for photos, not the staged smile for distant relatives. This one was different. It was real. Candace turned sharply, eyes scanning the crowd until she found them, Olivia and Ruth, sitting together in the grass, heads close, shoulders touching. Ruth was pointing at something in the beads, and Olivia was laughing so hard she had to cover her mouth with both hands. It didn't look messy, it didn't look disruptive, it just looked warm. And that was the problem. Candace had spent weeks planning this party. Every tablecloth, every flower, every glass of cucumber water had been chosen to show the world how perfect everything was. And yet here they were, off-script, off-brand, ruining the image with something as reckless as genuine connection. She clenched her jaw and handed her drink to a server without a word. The sound of her heels slicing into the grass was sharp and steady as she walked. She moved fast, past the buffet, past the champagne tower, right toward them. Ruth didn't look up at first. She was tying a loose knot in the second bracelet, careful not to let it slip. Candace stopped a few feet away, folded her arms and waited. "Ruth," she said, her voice even but colder than shade. Ruth looked up slowly, meeting her eyes. "We need to talk." Olivia's hand shot out, grabbing Ruth's wrist. "She's not done," the girl said. Candace crouched slightly, still smiling, but it was tight around the edges. "Sweetheart, Ruth needs to get back to work, okay?" Olivia didn't let go. Ruth gave her hand a soft squeeze. "It's all right," she said gently. "I'll be right back." Candace straightened up and turned on her heel, leading the way toward the far side of the house, away from the guests. Her steps were sharp, her silence louder than any words. When they were out of view, she spun around. "What do you think you're doing?" Ruth didn't answer right away. Candace's voice lowered, but her words hit like slaps. "This is a private family event. You are not here to bond with my stepdaughter. You were hired to clean up, nothing else." Ruth stayed calm. She was alone. I sat with her. Candace's laugh was hollow. "She's a child. Children get bored. You don't insert yourself into things that don't concern you." Ruth didn't blink. "She concerns me." Candace's expression changed just slightly. "I was there before you," Ruth said quietly. "I held her when she cried. I tucked her in. I stayed up through fevers. I don't need a title to know what that means." Candace stepped closer. "If you keep pushing, you won't just lose this job, I'll make sure no one hires you again." Ruth didn't move. "Then I'll still sleep at night." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Just the sound of a breeze pushing through the hedges behind the house. Candace narrowed her eyes. "You think you matter to her, but you're just a memory I buried for a reason." Ruth didn't flinch. Some things don't stay buried. Then she turned and walked away, not fast, not dramatic, just steady. And Candace stood there, alone, watching her go. What she didn't realise was that from behind the corner of the house, someone else had seen the whole thing. And the story, it was just beginning to unravel. Ruth stepped back into the yard with the same calm, steady walk she'd always had. Nothing about her said confrontation, no raised voice, no drama, just a quiet strength that didn't need to prove itself. But everything felt different now, because behind her Candace was still standing alone in the shadow of the house, stunned that someone had spoken to her that way, and even more stunned that someone had walked away after doing it. Ruth returned to where Olivia was waiting. bracelets still clutched in her little hands. And the second she saw her, Olivia stood up and wrapped her arms around her waist like it was the safest place in the world. Neither of them said a word. Across the garden, the guests were still sipping, smiling, pretending they hadn't noticed the shift in the air. But they had. Everyone had. Something unspoken was moving through the crowd like the wind before a storm. And then, almost too casually, a photographer walked up. He was one of the party staff, holding a camera with a wide strap and a practiced smile. "Hey, birthday girl," he said cheerfully. "Mind if I get a quick shot of you?" Olivia turned her head, then looked at Ruth. "Only if she's in it." The photographer chuckled, confused. "Your mum here?" Olivia didn't hesitate. She pointed to Ruth. Her voice was soft but steady. "She is my mum." The man blinked. "Oh, okay, sure." He raised the camera, but that one sentence had already done something bigger than any picture could. Within seconds, heads turned. Conversations stalled. The air, once full of light laughter and music, went still. Candace had just come around the corner when she heard it. Her heels slowed, her eyes locked on the scene unfolding like it didn't belong to her party anymore. "Olivia," she called out, voice too calm. "Sweetheart, don't say things like that." But Olivia didn't turn around. "She's the one who raised me," she said, still looking at Ruth. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Ruth didn't move. Her chest felt tight, her hands suddenly unsure of what to do. She hadn't expected this, not from Olivia, not now, not like this. Candace took a step forward, her smile stretched too thin. "She's not your mother," she said through her teeth. "She's the maid." Olivia turned then, really turned, and looked straight at Candace. "You never hugged me," she said simply. The sentence landed like glass breaking. Candace blinked. "Excuse me?" "You take pictures, you make parties, but you never hug me," she does. People were watching now. Some were pretending not to. Others weren't even trying to hide it. A few phones had come out, slow, discreet, but very real. "And Richard?" He finally looked up from the drink table. His eyes found Olivia and Ruth beside her. And something in his face changed, like he was seeing the whole picture for the first time. Candace took another step forward. "This is not the time, Olivia." But Olivia didn't back down. "It's never the time," she said, "and I'm tired of pretending." Ruth tried to speak, tried to ease the moment, but nothing came out. Her throat felt full. Richard started walking toward them, his steps slow, unsure. Candace turned to him, expecting backup, but he didn't look at her. He was looking at Ruth, and at the little girl who had just turned the whole party into something none of them could control anymore. Richard stopped a few steps away from them. His hands were in his pockets, but his shoulders were tight, like he hadn't taken a real breath in years. He looked at Olivia, his daughter, standing there with her hand on Ruth's arm, bracelets stacked on her wrist, eyes full of something that wasn't anger, just clarity. And maybe that was worse. Candace stood beside him, arms crossed, waiting for him to shut it all down, waiting for him to tell Ruth to step away, for Olivia to behave. But he didn't. He just stood there, caught between a moment and a memory. "Richard," Candace whispered sharply, "say something." He glanced at her, then back at Ruth. His voice was quiet. "Is it true?" Ruth's throat was dry. She looked at Olivia, then back at him. She didn't blink. "I raised her after her mother passed. I held her when she had colic, fed her when she wouldn't eat, sang to her every night. She called me Mama before she even knew what it meant." Candace laughed, sharp and forced. "That's ridiculous. She was a baby. She doesn't remember." But Olivia did. "I remembered the way she smelled," she said softly. "The way she rubbed my back when I cried. The lullaby she made up just for me." Candace shook her head. "She's manipulating her. This is emotional." "Stop," Richard said, louder than he meant to. Candace flinched. He turned toward Ruth again. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Ruth looked at him like he already knew the answer. "Because you didn't want to hear it," she said. "You wanted a clean slate, a new marriage, a picture-perfect life." He lowered his eyes. "I didn't think it would matter." Ruth's voice stayed steady. It mattered to her. Candace stepped forward. "You're going to take her side, over your wife?" Richard didn't answer right away. He just looked at Olivia. Really looked at her, not like a father who was checking in, not like someone scanning for behaviour, but like someone realising how much they'd missed. And in that quiet space, Olivia reached up and held Ruth's hand again. Her small fingers curled around Ruth's without hesitation. That simple gesture said everything. Candace's voice cracked. "This is insane, she's the maid." But no one was listening to her anymore. Ruth knelt beside Olivia, brushing a curl away from her forehead. "I didn't want you to find out like this." "I'm glad I did," Olivia whispered. The crowd around them stayed still. Nobody dared to move. The music from the speakers had long faded into the background. All the colour and shine of the party now felt like noise. What stood out was just one little girl, and the woman who never stopped choosing her. Richard looked at them, then finally at Candace. "I think it's time we stop pretending." Candace narrowed her eyes. "Pretending what?" He took a breath. "That this family ever started with honesty." And just like that, something broke, quietly, deeply, and all at once. Candace was still standing there, mouth slightly open like she hadn't processed what he just said. "What do you mean, stop pretending?" she asked, voice tight. Richard didn't yell, he didn't raise his hands or make a scene. He just looked at her with the kind of tired honesty that doesn't come easy. "I mean," he said slowly, "that we've been acting like this is a family, but it's not really." Candace let out a soft laugh, dry, defensive. "Are you serious right now because of her?" Richard turned to Ruth, then to Olivia, still holding her hand. "Because of them," he said. The words were simple, but they landed with weight. Candace stepped back like someone had pushed her. "So what? You're throwing me out? You're divorcing me over a bracelet and a story from years ago?" "No," he replied. "I'm divorcing you because you don't see her. You never have. You've been more focused on planning parties and posing for pictures than being present. And I let it happen. I looked away because it was easier than facing the truth." His voice cracked just slightly on that last word, truth. Ruth didn't say a thing. She didn't need to. She stood still, grounded in the kind of quiet dignity that couldn't be faked. Candace's eyes darted around, looking for someone, anyone, to back her up. But the crowd had changed. The guests weren't whispering anymore, they were just watching, and not in the way she liked. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice sharper now. "You're letting a child's memory and a maid's guilt rewrite your life." But Richard didn't budge. "No," he said, "I'm finally doing the one thing I should have done a long time ago." He turned to Ruth. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve to ask, but I'm asking anyway, for her." Olivia looked up at him. "I want her to stay," she said, soft but certain. He nodded, tears welling up now. "Then she stays." There wasn't applause, no cheers, just stillness. A soft kind of silence, like something sacred had finally been spoken into the open. Candace stood there frozen, her hands curled at her sides. She looked down at Olivia, then at the bracelets, then back at Richard. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "She's confused. You're both confused." But even as she said it, her voice lost its bite. Because no one was confused anymore. Not Ruth, not Olivia, not Richard. Only her. Olivia stepped forward then, slow and sure. She slipped the second bracelet off her wrist, the one with her name on it, and held it out toward Candace. "You can throw this away too," she said, "if it makes you feel better." Candace didn't take it. She just stared at it, and at the child she never really knew, never really tried to. Ruth reached down, gently taking Olivia's hand again. They turned away together, quiet but whole. And that's when it became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't just about who raised Olivia, it was about who saw her, who chose her, even when nobody else did. The party didn't end with a big announcement. No one clinked a glass or stood on a chair, it just shifted. Little by little, guests began to gather their things. Some avoided eye contact, others gave polite nods, like they weren't sure what to say. No one looked at Candace, not really. The woman who once stood at the centre of every conversation now felt like wallpaper. She didn't cry, she didn't yell. She just stood there, watching it all slip through her fingers, quietly unravelling, like a ribbon coming loose. By the next morning, her bags were gone. No note, no goodbye. Just a soft echo of perfume in the hallway, and an empty space in the closet. Nobody asked where she went, nobody needed to. Richard didn't talk much that day. He stayed in his office for most of it, phone turned off, hands still, eyes distant. There's a kind of heaviness that comes when you realise you've missed years you can't get back. And now that he finally saw his daughter, he couldn't unsee her. But Olivia? She didn't cry either. That afternoon she sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs under the chair while Ruth flipped pancakes at the stove. It was a Sunday, quiet, no guests, no dress code, just the soft sound of batter hitting a hot skillet. "Can we put chocolate chips in them?" Olivia asked. Ruth looked over her shoulder, smiled. "You read my mind." They ate together at the table, not rushed, not staged. Just 2 plates, a little syrup, some napkins that didn't match. Olivia got powdered sugar on her nose and didn't care. Halfway through, she reached across the table and placed her hand on Ruth's. "I don't care what anybody says," she said, eyes serious. "You're my person." Ruth blinked once, her throat tight. "I always knew," Olivia added, "even when you were just in the background." Ruth didn't speak for a second. She just wrapped her hand around Olivia's and held it there. "I always knew too," she whispered back. They finished breakfast that way, in no rush to move on, no need to impress anyone, no cameras watching. Just warmth between them, real, imperfect, and enough. Later that night, Olivia tucked the bracelets into a small wooden box beside her bed. She didn't wear them every day anymore. Not because they didn't matter, but because she didn't have to prove anything now. She knew who loved her, and that kind of knowing doesn't fade. The house was quieter after that, softer. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but peaceful, like a deep breath after too many years of holding it in. There were no more parties for a while, no photographers, no flower walls, just pancakes on Sundays, beads in small velvet pouches, and the sound of a child's laughter that didn't need an audience. At the heart of this story is a simple truth. Love isn't always loud. It doesn't need a title, a spotlight, or permission. Sometimes love just sits beside you, listens when no one else does, remembers you when the world forgets. And in a world that often values image over intimacy, this little girl reminded us of something big. The people who truly love you are the ones who show up, even when they're not supposed to, even when no one's watching, even when they're told to stay in the background, because real love doesn't ask to be seen, it just is. And that's what makes it unforgettable. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. It means more than you know. If it touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone, or made you feel just a little less alone, I'm grateful you are here. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. There's always more to feel, more to reflect on right here on Rain Inside. Until next time, take care of your heart